Welcome back to PedalBox, where we are not going to hand wave away some magic CAD. We're actually going to tackle a problem that has been plaguing me in particular for weeks and months, and actually probably getting on to a couple of years at this point. A lot of the interior is 3D printed, and we've been making great strides across the last 12 months or so to finish up an awful lot of those pieces, and there's just a couple of them left to do, but one of them is really difficult. Obviously, a few episodes ago we made great progress on the gear stick, but that is a fairly simple shape that we can model as the unit, clearance around, and then build what we need to cover it up and actually mount it in a fairly secure way into the car. The part I've actually had the most trouble modelling something around is the handbrake. The last couple of times we've tried to map out all of the holes in the geometry around this, it's been the end of the day, getting dark, and we've tried to rush it. We've forgotten measurements and it's just not gone well. So this time, we started way earlier in the day, we're actually going to do this properly and map out every single dimension we can possibly think of to model the handbrake itself, and then build a shroud that fits around it and covers everything up that we need to down here, and maybe even incorporates a couple of cup holders at the back. Now, getting into this handbrake is a bit of a nightmare because the seats are in the way. To take the seats out, you have to take the floor out, which means undoing a couple of dozen bolts and lifting the car in the air. And given it's very cold and wet outside, it is not particularly fun to lie on the floor. So we're going to do our best to just work around it with a tape measure, a rule, an angle measurer, and the verniers as well to get everything we possibly can, at least close enough that I can make a draft piece and then tweak it to exactly what we need. Now I'm going to save you all the drudgery of watching us do all of the measuring around this and skip right to the drawing. That worked a lot better than expected. So we now have every dimension we can possibly imagine we might need, from the handbrake itself, from all of the mounting brackets, the holes in the transmission tunnel that the cables come through, all referenced from the back of the gear stick, because eventually the gear stick surround is going to flow down in across the top of here and make it all look seamless and neat. At least that's the plan. Whether or not it happens is a different matter altogether.
Okay, so first up I'm going to make a model of the tunnel, including the gear stick plinth and the handbrake, with a new set of measurements. Last time we just built a model of what we wanted to make, and it turned out wrong in a whole bunch of ways. This time, whatever parts we make, we can use any errors to improve the accuracy of the base model and hopefully get the next ones right, or at least closer. So here I've got the tunnel made with the existing holes for screws and the access for the cables cut in, and I'm modelling the handbrake lever above it into another body. These don't need to be absolutely perfect representations. We're not making replicas of these parts, just close enough that the dimensions and locations are right where we care about. So now we have an environment to build the parts we want in, and hopefully get things pretty close the first time. But to verify this, rather than just rely on the measurements we've taken, we can make some templates and verify it properly. This first template maps out the hole spacing around the handbrake using the tunnel cable access hole for a reference point. It doesn't need to do all the holes perfectly, since the only ones we actually care about are the outer two, which are really important for fixing the part onto the tunnel, and the frame of the handbrake lever is actually what we'd need to avoid crashing into. I've also added a lip on the edge so we can align it to the edge of the tunnel as well, which will give us both fore and aft referencing with the hole that's cut out, and left-right using the lip. The lip aligns nicely with the edge of the tunnel, so we've got that nice and square, and the corners align pretty accurately with the cutout for the cables as they go down through the metal. The fit around the handbrake bracket itself is pretty good. It's very close on one side, it's almost a perfect fit, and there's a little bit more space on the other side, so we can make that pad just a little bit bigger if we want to. The important bit, the two holes that will actually mount this piece to the car, seem to be pretty accurate, but there is a little bit of tweaking we can do. Just move them around a couple of millimeters, tweak them and get them in exactly the right place, and we probably don't need to make another template to do this. Just take a few measurements and do a few adjustments in CAD. Something I noticed with that template, the tunnel seems to be a little bit narrower than we originally thought. It just hangs ever so slightly over the edges, so I'm going to make another small template here just to measure the side and also get an accurate representation on the angle at the side of the tunnel. I don't think we'll need it for any of these parts, but it's good to know for the future. Before we go and test that though, we can make another template to help verify a few other things. We want to make sure that where we've placed the handbrake in the CAD model is the same as where it sits above the tunnel. And to do that, we can actually start making the cowl piece that we want to go around the handbrake lever. This part only needs to encapsulate the sides of the handbrake lever and stop anything getting into the mechanism. Beyond that, we pretty much have free rein on the design. There's nothing really specific that we need other than making it look decent. To make this, I just built off the template I just used, just trimming off the lip from the edge and making it a little bit taller to clear the bolts that actually hold the handbrake onto the tunnel. On the driver's side, the bracket sticks out from the side of the handbrake to give it a little rigidity and stop it falling side to side. I modelled this bracket in another body so that I can use it as a reference to avoid when I build the sides up on the actual handbrake cover itself. There's two ways I could have gone about this. I opted to build both the inside and outside contours, avoiding that bracket and mirror it from either side, and then extrude that forward along the length of the part. I could have just made the outside contours, the curves as they go down, extruded them forward, and then cut out everything I needed from the centre to clear all the bracketry and mounts for the handbrake. Because I opted to make the sides and not hollow out the back, I'm now having to fill in the front with another piece that goes around the bottom of the handbrake itself. This fits between those two sides and ultimately forms one contiguous part that goes around and makes a full, flat face underneath the handle. The curves that I've put in don't actually go all the way up, they don't go as high as I need them to that little seam around the rounded part at the bottom of the handle. So I've just extruded those two top faces up to reduce the exposed mechanism to its absolute minimum. Making it go all the way around the handle at this point because of its shape is a little bit more tricky because of the motion that handle goes through, and you'll see more of that later once we hopefully get one of these printed and put on the car.
So we've got another two test prints done. This one fits really nicely across the front, so we know that this is actually about 113mm across. And I also added a slightly different shaped kick out to the bottom just to see if I could build the profile down the side of the tunnel, although we're not actually going to need to do anything with it. It was more of just a curiosity's sake. So it just moves a tiny bit, which isn't too bad. This one goes around the front of the handbrake, which I appreciate is actually quite difficult to see because we want to know where this sits. According to the measurements that we've taken, it feels like the handbrake is slightly off center. So this is built off those dimensions, and we're just going to try and see whether or not that is the case, assuming I put it in the right way around. Nope. That seems wildly incorrect, and that's more weird because I did change the sizing of this so that it was 113mm across, but it is very, very offset. So obviously where the handbrake sits in relation to those bolts is not down the centre line. So we're going to have to take some more measurements, rejig a bunch of things, and print another test piece.
To check the misalignment of the handbrake, I've made another quick simple jig which just sits on top of the tunnel and aligns with the edge, much like the lip of the one measuring the holes. This should touch the outside edge of the handle at the top where it's widest, and if we're lucky, both sides will be the same. However, at the front, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's just going to be equal at the back, and we're going to have to do some adjustment either on the car, on the CAD, or on the actual handbrake itself.
Here's the little centering jig. I'm just going to pop this on this side, and already I can see that is not coming up centered. It's on the button, but it's very much not on the outside of the main handbrake portion, which is the plan. If I put it on this side just to confirm, yep, that's pretty far out. Not sure how we didn't notice that. We can put it on the back here as well and make sure, if we just put it in there, that is really nicely aligned on the side there. And if we check the other side, it's a little bit tricky to get in from here, but yep, that fits perfectly. So the back of the handbrake at this end is centered, so we got that right, and it's this bolt that is going to be offline. So hopefully we can just slot this piece, bend it across slightly, well, move this across slightly and rebolt this down, and that should solve our problem.
So with the handbrake alignment hopefully addressed, we can start on the back section of the housing. And initially we're just going to make a big old block and start cutting away everything that isn't what we want. That does also mean a few changes needed to the front section as well, which we left square at the bottom for testing, but really needs to be smooth where it joins the tunnel. The geometry didn't quite line up here as simply as I'd hoped. I got away with putting a single curve on the right hand side, the passenger side of the car, but on the driver's side of the car that wouldn't quite work. I ended up having to use two arcs and blend them both in together in order to get it to join up right at the very edge of the model where it sits on top of the tunnel. I'm sure there's a better way I could have done this, but this is a quick and dirty way of doing it, and ultimately it worked for what I need and it won't have any lasting negative impacts. Once those were set up, I had to copy them onto the back piece, and because you can't actually reference from one body to another body, I had to try and vaguely eyeball it in. Now there weren't too many constraints to deal with, so it wasn't actually all that hard, and obviously I did have the other sketch with known similar reference points I could have just pulled the numbers from and typed it in manually and got exactly the result I wanted, but I didn't really need to. There's not actually that many variables here to deal with. Obviously, if we're going to put some storage in the top of here, having it as narrow as the handbrake is a little bit pointless. And if we're going to make some cup holders, we need to make enough space to fit really at least 2 cans and possibly some other stuff. I used the grooving tool to sweep the sketch around to start creating that widening portion. 45 degrees was definitely a little bit too far, and because the sides were different, it didn't actually match. One side ended up around 40 and the other one around 38, but they match up nicely, and now they form a smooth transition from the narrow part where the handbrake is to the wider part at the back. I looked at putting the cups centrally, but 2 long thin storage bins either side seemed a lot less useful than a single larger one, albeit in a bit of a weird shape. So I tessellated the cup holders slightly and mapped out the rest before smoothing all the corners for no real reason other than aesthetics. I could have just lifted this perimeter up to the final height and then cut the holes for both the drink holders and the storage back down into it, but since I was already at the height this would be brought back down to, I could just make the whole thing in one sketch and bring up only the material that I needed to the final height. This way both the pad and the pockets are done in a single step. Blending the sharp edge was slightly more tricky. I pocketed the final shape from the 40-degree sweep out to nothing so it ran all the way to the edge. But I couldn't put a simple radius on it because it goes down to nothing at the very forward corner and it has nothing to actually radius around onto, so the system breaks. I was able to radius the upper part around the storage bin and the cup holder quite easily, but then how to deal with the lower part that I'd just raised up from? That still had a sharp edge. I mapped out the shape on the face, completely forgetting that you could just move an entire face and use a tool on it, and then use the grooving tool around the arc of the radius that I just created, thereby removing all the material and blending it away to nothing. On the other side, I remembered I could just do this on the face in a single step and just grooved it directly out. There are 2 last critical jobs for this part. First up is making the space in the bottom half underneath the cup holders for the handbrake cables and the tensioner to pass through under the cup holders and through down into the tunnel access hole. The sloped sides means I can't just make a pocket rectangle and just dump it all the way through because it would break through the sides. So instead I created one on the face and another one set further back into the part and used the subtractive loft between them to get a big enough cavity without affecting the walls and creating big holes. Next I need to make a hole so that we can bolt this part down to the riv nut that's already in the tunnel. I'm going to use a single socket head screw that will go all the way down through the whole part and sit underneath one of the cup holders. We already know where this needs to go thanks to the reference model we made at the start, so we just make 2 holes, one all the way through for the shank of the bolt and another one part way down for the head of the bolt, which will sit right down in the middle of the part. Because there are only 3 bolts between 2 pieces, they need to be glued together, but doing that would trap the handbrake lever inside, since it won't fit down through the gap it operates in on the front section. You would never be able to remove this, at least easily, without breaking the 2 pieces apart. If you have to do that and you don't have any superglue on hand, now you're not going to be able to secure everything back in place properly, at least certainly not the rear half. So the 2 parts need to interlock together. Here I'm adding 4 tangs and corresponding holes onto each side so that they will just fit nicely together and hold in place. We might not even need to glue them, but if we do need to glue them, we can get away with using significantly less than we would have had to before. I'm not using the drafting tool on these tangs to create a relief. I'm just doing it manually with the chamfer tool because at this point it was late and I couldn't be bothered to fight the drafting tool to make it do what I wanted.
Finally, we're out here with our printed parts. These fit together really nicely, just like that. And that is the bulk of our center console, and I really like how this looks. Before we fit it though, there were a couple of other pieces I had to make just to test the fit on the rear. I printed this one out just to give me a rough idea of how the storage was going to work, and also to verify that the size of the hole I'd made for a drinks holder is actually going to fit a drink in it, which it does. So that was really useful. And then another one, which was the base plate at the back. I needed to make sure that this void around here was going to be big enough to go over that hole where the cables dive down through, and that the screw hole was in the right place. Now when I put this on, I realized the screw hole was actually quite far out of line. It was about 8 millimeters further back than I had in the drawing. So I'm not sure where that error came from, but a nice simple print solved that problem for us. So now we are at the final piece. This is looking really nice, as I said, and we can actually test it and see if it fits in place. So the handbrake up, we can put the first part in. I haven't bolted this section back down again. I want to make sure that the change we make to this is going to be right, and we're not just making the hole bigger and bigger and bigger. We're going to put it in exactly the right spot that we need. This slides underneath through there and aligns quite nicely with that. And this piece drops in like this. There we go. Now we can check the alignment of the bolt holes that go down into the tunnel. So this one's looking pretty good. This one still seems just fractionally off, but I think that's just because the riv nut is bent over, so we can redo that fairly easily. But the one down the back is the hardest one to see. It's actually easier just to move it around to make sure that we find it. And this one are in exactly the right place now, which is great. So this will fix down precisely where we need it, and the handbrake will drop. There's not too much of a hole down there. I might try and put a little bit of material on here just to cover that up, but we'll see whether we really need to or not. That might be one for after the first round of the IVA. And then lifting this up, you can see where I had to notch out the back of this just to make a little bit more room for the handle. That should be an ample amount of space for the handbrake to rise up into. If we're pulling the handbrake up beyond there, we just need to retension it, but otherwise this looks really good. Well, thanks very much for watching. As you can see, this is a fairly iterative process, although we've done quite well, much better than we did on the side pods, with only making a couple of small templates to verify some measurements, and then only making the final pieces once each, which, considering there's about 400 grams worth of plastic in there, I think that's pretty good. We don't want to make too many of them and just have them floating around as scrap. Obviously there is quite a lot more to do. We want to extend across the front here into our gear stick cover. This needs some work on it as well. This was just another draft piece. The only piece we really need to do is the back though, so that's not too bad. We just need to round off the back, and if you'd like to see more of that happening in slightly longer form, I guess, with a little bit more detail rather than skipping over a lot of the design process in a time lapse, because there's hours worth of work that went into these two pieces, we could probably do something around that and maybe put it out as a special video in midweek and keep the rest of the videos going in this sort of format. So let us know what you think in the comments, whether you want to see more 3D printing, more of how the 3D printing sausage is made. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the little notification bell too. Don't forget you can check out shop.pedalbox.show, where you can buy t-shirts, hats, mugs, all sorts of things like that, including the one I'm actually wearing right now, because the weather has turned pretty nice at last. You can also support us at patreon.com/pedalboxshow, where everybody from the $5 tier up gets a discount at the merch shop. So if you do want to buy quite a bit of merch, maybe do that first and you'll get a discount on your order. Thanks once again for watching. We are getting ever closer to this being ready for the IVA. I went to Kitfest, as you might have seen a few videos ago, and some of the ones there looked a lot less polished and finished, but obviously went through the IVA. So that gives me a great deal of hope for this, and it's really spurred me on to actually push it through and maybe gloss over some of the finer points that I really would like to do to this before we put it in for its probably first test, because it'll likely need a retest no matter what. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next video.